So in the last class, we started this introduction to applied linguistics, and we have discussed these questions. What is applied linguistics? Who is an applied linguist? What do an applied linguist do? What is the scope of applied linguistics? How does applied linguistics differ from theoretical linguistics? How does applied linguistics relate to other disciplines like sociology, psychology, philosophy, literary theory, and others? And we try to get some answers for these questions. And we have seen different points, viewpoints of different applied linguists. So we had a consensus that linguistics is comparatively an older discipline than applied linguistics. So first, uh, we had linguistics in different institutions and universities as a formal discipline for study, and then we had applied linguistics. And we have seen that when we try to find out the study areas of linguistics, then we divide linguistics into two types: microlinguistics and macrolinguistics. And under microlinguistics, we have the narrower view, and in macrolinguistics, we have a broader view. So in microlinguistics, we have phonology, phonetics, morphology, syntax, lexicology. But in macrolinguistics, we have this applied linguistics. And what do we study under applied linguistics? Generally, we look at English language teaching and testing, then stylistics and discourse analysis, contrastive linguistics and error analysis, dialectology, translation. At the same time, there are certain disciplines like psychology, neurology, sociology, then mathematics, computers, discourse and communication. When they interact with linguistics, then we have related disciplines as well, and that will also be the part of macro linguistics. So we can see that the scope of macro linguistics is broad, whereas the scope of applied linguistics is also a bit broad than the pure linguistics, then the theoretical linguistics, then the structural synchronic linguistics that we have. And we also saw that what factors contributed to reformulation of applied linguistics. So we have seen that during that time, there were various approaches and theories uh, which were user oriented. And the user oriented theories, they were in the field of let's say literary studies as well, like reader response theory and literary criticism. In the field of teaching, we have learner centered pedagogy in education. At the same time, some international organizations also formed. So one such organization, Applied Linguistics, uh, like International Association of Applied Linguistics, formed in 1973. The British Association of Applied Linguistics formed in 1967. Then American Association of Applied Linguistics formed in 1977. So the formation of these organizations, they also contributed to applied linguistics as a formal discipline. So we have seen that there are other disciplines, and when these disciplines they interact with linguistics, then we have disciplines like sociolinguistics, psycholinguistics, discourse analysis, stylistics, which are also the part of applied linguistics. Then, in the seventh World Congress of Applied Linguistics held in 1984, uh, it highlighted the following agenda. So this agenda is also useful uh, because we also find like what will be the scope of applied linguistics in future. So in 1984, it was also decided. So what is the first thing? Language problems in developing nations, linguistic consequence of colonialism, national language problems, literacy programs, etc. So, linguistic consequence of colonialism. So, when we talk about India, and India was also a colony of uh, England, and in the 1947, India got independence, but still the language of the colony is in prominence. That is English, and we all are studying higher subjects in English. And someone who gets a good education is English is considered educated in India or more knowledgeable. So this is the linguistic consequence of colonialism that we have. So this is also the part of applied linguistics. The national language problems. For example, in India, we have three language formula. So, and why do we have three language formula? What is the need of three language formula? And why there is no national language in India? We have official languages only. Like one is the English is the official language. Then Hindi is also an official language we have. So why we do not have any national language? Because India is a multilingual country, and in a multilingual country, many languages are spoken. So which language will become a national language? Because if we say that Hindi will become a national language, then the the speakers of Dravidian languages, they will become angry. They will say, no, no, why do you want to make Hindi? Why do you want to impose Hindi on us? So that type of thing is there. Then literacy programs, etc., they are the part of applied linguistics. Then social linguistics is also the part of applied linguistics. Psycholinguistics is also the part of applied linguistics. Foreign language teaching, then mother tongue, up to what level students will get uh, 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 will study foreign language, or let's say second language, or up to which level a student will study in their mother tongue. So that is also the part of applied linguistics. Then fields like discourse analysis, stylistics, translation, lexicography, they are also the part of applied linguistics. Then logic and language, this type of interaction is also the part of linguistic engineering. So all these are the part of applied linguistics. And in 1984, during the 7th Congress of Applied Linguistics, it was decided that this agenda was decided that all these things will fall under applied linguistics. So one thing we can see, that the scope of applied linguistics is broad than the linguistics, then the pure linguistics, then the theoretical linguistics. But we also find at the same time two views. Like one is the broad view, where under applied linguistics you have many disciplines. Under applied linguistics you have many field of studies, but we also have some limited view. So according to Pitt Coders, introducing applied linguistics appeared in 1973, and the term applied linguistics was taken as being synonymous with language teaching. So this is very limited view. Like if you are saying that applied linguistics is equal to language teaching, then it is like very, very, very limited view. But that is not the view of all applied linguists, that you need to remember. So it is a view of few applied linguists, that okay, applied linguistics means language teaching. Then Peter Stevens pointed out that the British interpretation of applied linguistics can be summarized as multidisciplinary approach to the solution of language-based problems. So again, this is like only language-based problems, and a multidisciplinary approach. Again, this is broader than the approach that applied linguistics is only language teaching. So again, it is a multidisciplinary approach to solution of language-based problem. That means wherever language is used, then it is applied linguistics. For example, when language interacts with computers, then it is also applied linguistics. When language interacts with mind, then it is also applied linguistics. When language interacts with society, then also applied linguistics, and likewise. So you can see like these two are two different applied linguists, but they how they differ. Like one is very limited, Pitt Coder is very limited, but Peter Stevens is quite broad in his approach. So similarly, we have another applied linguist Ingram, and what Ingram says, applied linguistics involves more than applying linguistics. So again, like he's talking about that something broad. It is not simply the theories, the approaches that we have learned in pure and theoretical linguistics we are applying to other field. It draws on any field that provides relevant insight into the number of language, or that elucidates that language related problems in hand. That means like whenever you use language to whichever field, that is applied linguistics. So you can see like everything is applied linguistic in that manner, because human beings, they have language and they do different things with language all the time. L2 teaching, for example, is a complex task. L2 teaching means teaching a foreign language, teaching a second language is a complex task in which the nature of language, that means linguistics, how it is learned, that is psycholinguistics, and its role in society, sociology and sociolinguistics are obviously relevant. Equally, philosophy of education, dot, dot, dot. That means again, Ingram is pointing out that it is not simply that you have learned some theories, some approaches of pure linguistics, and when you are um, teaching to L2 learner, then you are applying those approaches, those theories to your teaching. That is not the case, but applied linguistics is a broad field. So similarly, Kaplan argues that applied linguists are the most humanistic of the breed of linguistics. So that means like there are different type of linguists, and someone who is an applied linguist is the most humanistic of the breed. So again, like it is looking at applied linguistics uh, uh, at a brighter side, since they are the most directly concerned with the solution of human problems stemming from various uses of language. Again, so Kaplan is of the view that applied linguistics is a broad field, and it covers everything that comes under the sphere of language. So we have seen here how applied linguistics it came into being, and how the scope of applied linguistics was decided during the passage of time. So we have focused on that thing. Now we will look at how language and society interact. So when language and society, the or language or sociology, these two disciplines interact, then we have sociolinguistics. So the other day we also discussed this language as a social practice. So when language is used in the society, then it is a part of sociolinguistics. And we started our discussion with this little story, and I want to read it once again. A group of blind men or unenlightened men walk into a dark room and touch an elephant, each one feeling a different part, not knowing that it was part of an elephant. One of them touches the leg, another touches the tusk, another touches the tail. And when they come out of the room and begin to describe what each of them felt, they fall into dispute as to what the truth is. So again, this is an analogy we are making, that think of a blind man, completely blind man, and they are entering into a dark room where there is an elephant. So elephant is also black, dark room is also black, and they are also blind. And what they are doing, like elephant is a huge animal, they are touching different part of animal, and they are saying that when it is asked that describe what you saw or what you felt inside the dark room, so they will come out with different answer. They will say like elephant is like is like a tusk, elephant is like a leg, like a pillar. So leg is like a pillar, so they will say like elephant is like a pillar. And they will say no, 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 elephant is like a rope, someone who touches the tail. So they have different type of perspective, they have different type of versions. So that is the thing that we have. And once we have this thing, then there is always a dispute, because everyone will talk about his or her views only. So what is important when we use language in society, it's not important to say or to say what we know only, but we also need to understand the other person's perspective. That is more important, because if we tell all the time what we know or what is our truth, then there is a possibility that there will be a dispute. So each firmly committed to his discrete part, but also blinded by his subjectivity and egocentric perspective. So that means like someone who touched the tail will say elephant is like a rope, elephant is like a snake, because tail is similar to snake, tail is similar to a rope. So their perspective is also not true. To see the elephant, one must be enlightened by the language of the heart. To see the elephant, the man should compare notes and hear the other. So that means like what is the better approach? The better approach is that all the blind men, they should tell, they should share their notes with each other, and then they decide like, okay, holistically this is like elephant. So what is more important? To compare notes and hear the other. So hearing other person's perspective, understanding other person's uh, perspective, and removing one's subjectivity is more important when we use language in society. So what is the philosophy of successful communication? So this small tale uh, teaches us a lesson and teaches us the philosophy of successful communication. And what is that? When we rely only on the perspective of what is accessible by our senses, the flesh, then we can expect to experience a failure to communicate. So that means like, if we are saying, we are doing saying all the time and we are not hearing, then there is a breakdown, because communication is not a one-way process, but communication is a two-way process. And we know like how to become a good communicator. You can become a good communicator once you give your ears to other person's talk. So that is the lesson, that is the philosophy this tale teaches us. So this is the starting point, this is the starting point of our discipline, sociolinguistics, that when linguistics and sociology, linguistic and society, they interact with each other, and when we have this social linguistics under applied linguistics. So this is this we will study in further detail. So what is the philosophy? And in Rumi's word, uh, Rumi, a Sufi saint, we can say. So what Rumi said: the heart has its own knowledge. The heart knows 100,000 ways to speak. So the meaning is like, don't be egocentric, don't be so selfish, don't be so subjective. Also give space to other people's voice. So that is the philosophy behind the thing that we have discussed. So now we will study that we use language in a society, and now we will try to study the socio-cultural and ideological view of language. So this thing is important when we try to study this language in society or sociolinguistics. So sometimes as teachers, we may wonder why a student is mispronouncing a word or reinventing syntactic structures. So this is our starting point, and this is quite relevant because you will also become future teachers in your life. And there is a possibility that you are teaching your students how to pronounce a particular word, in L2. That means, let's say, in second language. So a student is again and again mispronouncing the word, or let's say the subject word, this is the word order of the English language is subject, verb, and object, and the student is reinventing syntactic structure. So for example, in place of saying John loves Mary, the student is saying John Mary loves. So reinventing syntactic structure. As an English speaker, we know that when we say John Mary loves, then it is wrong English. It is not correct English. The correct English will be subject, verb, and object, that John loves Mary. So that type of problem we may face, uh, and sometimes teachers, they face all the time. So sometimes we may wonder why a student talks in a different or non-standard way. So there are different way of speaking. So one is the standard way of speaking, another one is non-standard way of speaking. So this is again like a possibility that we find that some students, they are speaking in non-standard way. So what is the reason behind that? We may even judge these incorrect forms as less or more. Fine, its meaning are strange. So how do we make the strange familiar? So if there is a variation, if there is a problem related to language we observe even in the class or outside, then how do we treat that? How do we treat that? So that is our work, that how we will take that particular thing. We find some variation. Let's see, someone says someone says Lucknow as Naklau. So Lucknow is the name of a place, like Lucknow is the capital of Uttar Pradesh, and Lucknow, and it is a fact that many people from the rural area, they won't pronounce it Lucknow, they say Naklau. So what is this? Actually, this is an example of metathesis. Metathesis, like you are just you are transferring consonant at the different place. So it is now, and you say nakhalau. Fine. So that type of thing, you are just replacing. You are replacing the consonant. It is known as metathesis in phonology. So that type of thing is there, but uh, this is just one example. So similar type of different variations you may find, and how those things will become familiar to you. So these things are at like at surface level, you will say, okay, these are incorrect forms. These forms should not be used, but many speakers are using. So you need to describe that phenomenon as well. So this is our starting point. But before that, we will look at a brief history of linguistics. So this will become our starting point, the socio-cultural and ideological view of language, with reference to some variations that we observe in language. So we will do that, but before that, we will look at uh, the brief history of linguistics also. So, in response to psychologist B.F. Skinner's behaviorist model of thought, Noam Chomsky championed a cognitive approach to language. So, we already know um, the debate between B.F. Skinner and Noam Chomsky, and the B.F. Skinner's model of language is known as a behaviorist model of thought, and Noam Chomsky's model is the cognitive approach to language. So these are two different approaches. And so B.F. Skinner says that language is like any other behavior. So we do different type of things. So it's like a habit formation. So language learning is like a habit formation. That is the behaviorist model of thought. For example, like if you have good habits, then you will be successful in life. If you have bad habits, then you will be a failure in your life. That type of approach is the behaviorist model of thought. But Noam Chomsky, he has different view, and that is the cognitive approach to language and linguistics. So prior to Chomsky's study of language, the discipline of linguistics largely looked at languages contrastively. So before linguistics, we know that we had a discipline like philology, and philology is known as historical and comparative linguistics. So historical linguistics, that means like you are tracing the history of a particular language. So you are trying to find out like, okay, from which language this particular language has been derived. So you try to find out, okay, now we have Dogri, now we have Hindi, but which language is the mother language of Dogri, which language is the mother language of Hindi. So if you are doing that type of thing, then it is the part of historical linguistics. And in comparative linguistics, you just compare two different languages. So you compare like what is the similarity between Sanskrit and Latin. You try to find out, okay, what are the similarities between, let's say, Dogri and Punjabi. That type of work if you do, then it is the part of philology that we have. So prior to Chomsky's study of language, so Chomsky's work, Syntactic Structure, published in 1957, and that is the starting point of the generativist approach or cognitive approach to language. That means language is innate, language is in our genes. Fine, that type of thinking. that it's not a language is not a learned behavior, but it is like in our genes, and we are designed in such a manner to learn a language very fast if we get appropriate environment. That type of thinking uh, is championed by Noam Chomsky. So behaviorists talk about language learning the same way they describe other aspects of human development. So like the way we walk, fine, is like, or let's say the way we run or the way we do different type of things. So that is like a behaviorist thing. So if you know, if you have this habit of waking up early in the morning, so this is the behavior that you have. So you will not find any difficulty in waking up early. So this is the behavior. So they believe like language is also like that. So people walk in a different manner, people talk in a different manner, fine. So they also consider that language is also this type of behavior. They viewed language as a set of learned behaviors, that they are the product of rote repetition, imitation, and a system of rewards and punishment. So like what do we have generally in lower grades? Once you study in schools at lower grades, then you find like uh, you get the teacher gives you good, fair, bad, fine. So these are rewards, star, fine. So what is this? Is reward and punishment. So this is again a behaviorist type of thing, that like, okay, once you have done something correct, like you have solved the sum very quickly, the teacher is writing excellent, teacher is writing very good. What is this? This is again the behavior, this is the part of behaviorism, reward and punishment. So like you have not completed your homework, then teacher say, okay, stand up. Then teacher say, oh, okay, this student has not done this his homework. And then teacher says like says certain things to you, and it is like a punishment to you. So this is again very much the part of behaviorism that we have. Then we in behaviorism we have that rote repetition. So like we all are sitting in front of a machine, or like a teacher is pronouncing words, and then there is continuous drill. Then once the teacher or the machine pronounces the word, then the students they repeat it again and again, and they learn the particular pronunciation of the word, particular pronunciation, how a particular sentence is pronounced. So this is all based on imitation, drill, rote repetition, and a system of rewards and punishment. Most of the games that you find on your mobile phones, that they are based on rewards and punishments. So once like you do well, then on the screen you find like congratulations, thumbs up, and all such things that you find. So this is like actually the behaviorist way of looking at language. So behaviorist they emphasize the difference in language through contrastive analysis of grammatical forms, and studied the historical evolution of written text. That means like once you are learning, let's say, English language, then the teacher will teach. Teacher will compare English language with your mother tongue. Let's say your mother tongue is Hindi, or let's say your mother tongue is Dogri. The teacher will do that type of. Teacher will say like in Hindi, you the Hindi word structure is like subject, object, and verb, and an English word structure is subject, verb, and object. So that type of thing teacher will do all the time. So this is the part of contrastive analysis of grammatical forms. At the same time, you will also take help of the historical evolution of written texts. That can be a possibility. So you will try to find out, okay, where the earlier traces of that particular languages are. So behaviorists they studied how languages change and how words relate to meaning. So these all things are the part of behaviorist model that you have. But the model that we follow now, the model that we follow in language learning now, that is the cognitive approach to language. That is not the behaviorist model of thought. There is a possibility in certain schools, certain colleges, you will find that teachers are still teaching with the behaviorist model of thought, and they are not well versed in the cognitive approach. So we have like communicative language teaching. So there is a possibility that you will find teacher is not using communicative language teaching. Teacher is all the time teaching you from grammar translation method only. So that there is a possibility that you find. I'm not saying like Noam Chomsky's cognitive approach totally wiped out B.F. Skinner's behaviorist model of thought. Okay, so we proceed further. So now what is Noam Chomsky's contribution? As we already know that Chomsky's book Syntactic Structure, published in 1957, showed us how a pure structural analysis of human syntax revealed that that language cannot be adequately explained as learned behavior. So language is not a learned behavior. And why language is not a learned behavior? Because once you are well versed in a particular language, then you are not using sentences that you have learned. You are also producing new sentences. For example, all of us are the native speaker of at least one language. Let's say my mother tongue is Hindi. There is a possibility that your mother tongue is also Hindi or Dogri or Kashmiri or any other language, and you are a competent speaker in that particular language. So if we say that language is learned, then there is a possibility that we have learned 1,000 sentences and we are repeating only those sentences and we are not creating new sentences. But that is not the case. So when I say in the morning I saw a dinosaur in my garage, now this is what, like I have not learned this type of sentence from anywhere. I'm just creating this sentence. So similar type of thing is there, that language is not a learned behavior, and language is cognitive. So language is cognitive and language is not a learned behavior, that we need to understand. So he assumed that if language was so complex, there had to be some biological predisposition for children to acquire language. So this is another thing, because we know that learning a language is a difficult task. If I say that, okay, try to learn French language now at this stage, or I will say, okay, try to learn German language, then it will take minimum 5 years to you to be a proficient speaker of German language if you study daily. So you understand that language learning is not very simple activity. But when we see a child, a small child, then we see that by the age of 3 or 4, a child becomes a proficient, competent speaker of a particular language. So what Chomsky says, that there are chances of some biological predisposition for children to acquire language. That means like we are designed in a manner to learn a language. We have that type of gene so that we can acquire language quickly if we get appropriate environment. So for example, I get the environment of the Hindi language, so I picked up Hindi. You get the environment of Dogri language, so you picked up Dogri. Someone gets the Kashmiri environment, so that person picks up Kashmiri language. But all of us are at least proficient, competent, fluent speaker of at least one language, that is for sure. According to Chomsky, the words languages were so similar that that a Martian visiting from outer space would quickly assume that there was only one language, the human language. So this is again an analogy, like an assumption, uh, like we are making, that the words languages were so similar. So we say that languages are different. Languages are different, but according to Chomsky's view, languages are different at surface level. But at deep level, almost all languages similar, not same, but similar. So the words languages were so similar that a Martian visiting from outer space, so someone who is from Mars, like someone who is coming from Mars, let's say, uh, or from outer space, will find out that, okay, human beings, though they are using different languages, but at deep level these languages are more or same. So the sounds, like English speaker is making the similar type of sounds, so Hindi speaker is also making similar type of sound, Dogri speaker is also making. So there is like plus and minus, like English speaker is making, let's say, 44 sounds, so Hindi speaker is making 54 sounds, Kashmiri speaker is making 50 sound. So that variation you will find in the how these sounds combines and make different words. So this is like an analogy we are making. Then Chomsky also talked about language as natural and innate. It was created in the mind by some type of language acquisition device. So Chomsky states that there is some language acquisition device. We have used this technical term, Chomsky used this technical term, language acquisition device, but actually there is no such language acquisition device that you can see through your naked eyes. So it's like a concept that we have, that there is some language acquisition device. That means like your brain that you have that gene, so that you acquire that particular language so quickly. So that is innate. So by birth you have that language acquisition device. So you have this biological predisposition to acquire a particular language very quickly if you get appropriate environment. So the theory that Chomsky spearheaded is known as generative grammar. So we already know that Chomsky is the founder of generative grammar, and this theory indicates that grammar is generated by the child's brain. So it is not the case that someone is literally teaching the child the words. That child starts speaking at the age of 4 or at the age of let's say 3, but it is like all the words the child hears from the environment. A child picks up his or her own grammar, and child generates the grammar. So this is the type of the cognitive approach we have uh, given by Noam Chomsky. So grammar is actually created in the brain, or as Chomsky said, it grows in the mind. So the grammar, like because you know grammar, that's why you are able to speak a language. So when I say like I'm a fluent speaker of Hindi language, that means when I speak, I will speak all the all the correct sentences, grammatical sentences of that language. There is the possibility that I do not know that particular word is a noun, particular word is a verb, but when I speak, I will speak fluently without any grammatical error. So that is the meaning, and that is the thing, that language is not learned, but language is acquired. And when Chomsky said that language grows in the mind. So I stop here, and if you have any question or doubt, you can ask me. I will try to answer that. And I hope that all of you are with me, and all of you are understanding that what we are actually discussing. So all of you, are you getting what we are discussing? I just simply